tool for 3 minutes. Michael was clinically dead. No pulse, no breath. Gone. But what he experienced during that time was more real than life itself. He stood before Jesus. He saw the gates of heaven and the horrors of hell. And now he's back with a terrifying warning. The end is closer than we think. What if everything you believed about life, death, and eternity was wrong? Michael saw the truth with his own eyes. He saw the suffering of those who ignored God. He saw the book where names were written or erased. He saw the deception coming upon the world, a final test before judgment. And Jesus himself gave him a message. Warn them before the door closes. This is not just another near-death story. This is a wake-up call, because time is running out. Do you think you'd be ready if today was your last day? Let me know in the comments. And if this message speaks to you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Most people who watch our videos aren't subscribed. Don't miss what's coming next. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications now. Michael never saw it coming. One moment he was crossing the street, lost in his thoughts, music blasting in his ears. The next a deafening screech of tires, a blinding impact. Then nothing. No pain, no sound. Just an overwhelming sense of weightlessness. He was floating above his own body, watching as strangers crowded around his lifeless form. Panic surged through him. But before he could react, an unseen force yanked him backward into darkness. At first, it was silent. Too silent. Then, a distant, eerie wail broke through. It was unlike anything he had ever heard, raw, guttural, filled with unimaginable agony. The darkness around him thickened, pressing against his soul like an unbearable weight. Shadows twisted and slithered, forming grotesque figures with hollow eyes. A putrid stench of decay filled the air, making his insides churn. Michael tried to scream, to move, but he was paralyzed, trapped in an unseen grip. A burning sensation crawled up his skin, as if unseen flames were licking at his very essence. The wails grew louder, more desperate, and suddenly Michael realized these were voices, countless voices, begging, screaming, pleading for mercy. But there was none. Horror gripped his soul as he saw them twisted figures writhing in an abyss of torment, their faces contorted in eternal regret. This isn't real, he thought. This can't be real. Then a voice, deep, echoing, undeniably powerful. You were warned. The darkness trembled. Michael's heart pounded as the shadows around him seemed to coil tighter, ready to consume him. He knew, in that instant, that he was standing on the brink of something beyond comprehension, something final. The weight of judgment pressed upon him, suffocating, as if his soul was being measured. And then a flash of light, a piercing radiance tore through the void, breaking the darkness apart. For the first time, Michael felt warmth, a presence so powerful yet so familiar. The shadows recoiled, hissing in defiance. And in that brilliant light, a figure emerged, one he never expected to see. The light was blinding, yet it didn't hurt his eyes. It was pure, warm-like, standing in the embrace of the sun without being burned. As Michael struggled to process what was happening, the figure within the radiance stepped forward. His presence commanded everything. The darkness shrank back in fear. The wailing ceased. The suffocating weight of judgment lifted. Michael knew, without being told, who stood before him. Jesus, but not as the paintings in churches depicted. This was not a distant, passive figure. He was powerful, so overwhelmingly holy that Michael could barely stand in his presence. His eyes burned with a fire that saw everything. They pierced through Michael, laying him bare. Every lie, every sin, every hidden thought exposed in an instant. There was no place to hide. Terror gripped Michael. He had always thought of himself as a good person. He went to church sometimes. He didn't kill, didn't steal. But standing before Jesus, he felt like a filthy rag, unworthy to even lift his gaze. The weight of his own failures crushed him. He opened his mouth to speak, to plead, but no words came. Then Jesus did something unexpected. He reached out his hand. The scars were still there, deep, eternal marks of sacrifice. His voice, though firm, was filled with a sorrow deeper than Michael could comprehend. "You were never truly mine." The words cut like a blade. Michael's mind raced. What did he mean? Hadn't he prayed before? Hadn't he believed? But in that moment, the truth became painfully clear. He had treated faith like an accessory, not a relationship. He had lived for himself, ignoring the quiet nudges, the moments God had called him. And now he was out of time. The atmosphere shifted. The light around Jesus burned brighter, and behind him Michael glimpsed something indescribable, gates of immeasurable beauty, radiating a peace beyond words. But just as quickly as he saw it, the vision faded, and the creeping darkness at his back began to stir again. A terrible realization struck him. He wasn't where he thought he'd be. Michael stood frozen as Jesus lifted his hand, and in an instant everything changed. Time unraveled before him like an endless tapestry, revealing every moment of his life, every choice, every thought, every secret he believed was buried. He wasn't just watching, he was reliving it. Every careless word, care, every selfish action. Every time he ignored the quiet voice telling him to do what was right, it all played out before him, raw and undeniable. At first, it was the small things, times he chose comfort over kindness, when he turned a blind eye to someone in need. Then it went deeper. He saw moments he had forgotten, choices he had justified, the way he had lied to make himself look better, the nights he wasted, chasing meaningless pleasures. The times he pushed God aside, thinking, "I'll get serious about faith later." But there was no later anymore. Then came the most painful part, seeing himself through the eyes of those he had hurt. He felt their disappointment, their pain, their broken trust, the careless jokes that cut deeper than he realized, the promises left unfulfilled, the prayers his mother whispered for him while he rolled his eyes, thinking she was just being dramatic. The weight of his actions crashed down on him like a tidal wave. He wanted to look away, but he couldn't. Jesus' eyes never left him. They weren't filled with anger but sorrow. Deep, heartbreaking sorrow. "You were given chances," Jesus said, his voice steady yet filled with grief. "I called you. I waited for you. But you loved the world more than me." Michael's chest tightened. He had always assumed he was good enough. He believed in God. He wasn't a murderer or some terrible person. But now, standing in the presence of pure holiness, his excuses crumbled. The truth was undeniable. He had lived for himself, not for God. And in that moment, he understood. Believing wasn't enough. As the vision faded, the atmosphere shifted again. A chill crawled up his spine. The warmth of Jesus' presence dimmed, and behind him, the shadows began to move once more. The review of his life had ended. Now, judgment was about to begin. A sudden force yanked Michael backward. Cut. The warmth of Jesus' presence faded, and in its place came an unbearable chill. Darkness surrounded him once again, but this time it was different. It was alive. It moved, slithered, and reached for him with unseen claws. A deep, guttural growl echoed through the void, followed by agonized screams, human screams. The air was thick with the stench of burning flesh and sulfur, so strong it made him gag. Then he saw them. Souls, countless souls, some crouched in the shadows, their faces twisted in permanent terror. Others clawed at the unseen walls, screaming for mercy that would never come. They weren't just in pain, they were in despair. True, endless despair. They knew they were never getting out. Michael struggled, trying to move, but the ground beneath him was shifting. If it could even be called ground, it felt unstable, almost like it was swallowing him whole. Then he felt it ice cold, skeletal hands gripping his ankles, his wrists, his throat. They were dragging him deeper. He fought, kicked, screamed, but it was useless. The more he struggled, the stronger they became. And then a voice, a whisper, yet deafening. You had your chance. Michael's breath caught in his throat. The presence behind that voice was more terrifying than the creatures around him. It was ancient, evil beyond comprehension. And it knew him. It knew his sins, his regrets, his weaknesses. It had been watching him his whole life. The hands tightened. A fiery wind blasted through the darkness, revealing massive gates in the distance, gates of iron, twisted and scorched, stretching endlessly into the abyss. Beyond them, the flames roared, and figures moved within them, not like people, but like shadows of what they once were, screaming, wailing, their bodies consumed yet never burning away. Michael felt himself being pulled closer. The heat became unbearable. His skin felt like it was peeling away, though there was no fire on him yet. He knew, deep in his soul, that if he crossed those gates, there would be no return, no second chances. This was forever. Terror unlike anything he had ever known consumed him. Jesus, please. His voice cracked as he screamed. Save me. For a moment, there was nothing. Just the pool of the abyss, the laughter of demons, the hopelessness sinking in. And then a blinding light. Just as the darkness was about to consume him, the blinding light erupted, cutting through the abyss like a sword. The demonic hands that gripped Michael recoiled, shrieking in agony as they burned away. The entire realm trembled. The very fabric of hell seemed to crack under the weight of the presence that had arrived. Michael gasped as the force dragging him down vanished. He collapsed onto what felt like solid ground, but his body still trembled with fear. He looked up and there he was, Jesus. His radiance was even more intense than before, but this time Michael didn't feel unworthy to look. Instead of judgment, there was something else in his eyes, mercy. With a single motion, Jesus reached out and took Michael's hand. The moment their skin touched, a surge of unimaginable power coursed through him. It wasn't just warmth, it was life itself. The pain, the fear, the weight of his sins, it all melted away in an instant. The flames that had licked at his feet vanished, set. The demonic whispers turned into distant echoes, retreating into the void. Then Michael saw it. Beyond Jesus, where the darkness ended, stood a gate. But this was nothing like the iron horrors of hell. This gate shimmered like crystal, stretching beyond what his mind could comprehend. Through it, he glimpsed something breathtaking, colors beyond the human spectrum, fields that seemed alive, music that resonated with the soul itself. The very air carried a presence of overwhelming peace and love. It was home. Jesus turned to him, his expression both firm and sorrowful. Many are called, but few choose to follow. His voice carried the weight of eternity. I rescued you, but now you must decide, will you live for me, or will you return to the path you walked before? Michael's heart pounded. He didn't deserve this second chance. He knew it. But Jesus had given it to him anyway, a debt he could never repay. And in that moment he made a vow: if he returned, he would never live the same way again. The light grew brighter, engulfing everything. Heaven's gates shimmered one last time before fading. Jesus' voice echoed in his soul. Warn them before it's too late. Then, like being yanked from a dream, Michael's eyes shot open. He was back, alive. But everything had changed. Michael's chest heaved as he gasped for air, his heart pounding in his ears. But he wasn't back yet, not fully. He was somewhere in between. The radiance of heaven still surrounded him, and before him stood Jesus, now holding something in his hands. A massive book, an ancient, glowing with an otherworldly light. Its pages shimmered as if they were alive. "This is the book of life," Jesus said, his voice filled with authority. "Every name written here belongs to those who are truly mine." Michael's breath caught in his throat as the book opened on its own. The names inside glowed with a golden brilliance, as if they pulsed with life. Some shined so brightly they were almost blinding. Others, however, flickered weakly dim, fading. And then there were those that had already disappeared, leaving only an empty space where they had once been. Michael swallowed hard. What does this mean?" Jesus turned to him, his expression both sorrowful and resolute. "Many believe they know me, but their hearts are far from me. They attend church. They pray when it's convenient. They follow traditions, but they do not truly love me. Their names were here once, but they chose the world instead." Michael's stomach twisted. He thought about all the times he had called himself a Christian while living however he wanted. How often he had ignored God's voice, thinking there would always be time to get serious later. How many times had he put his own desires before God? Was his name even in the book? Jesus gently turned the pages. Michael's eyes scanned desperately, searching, heart pounding. Then there it was. His name, it was there. But it wasn't glowing like the others. It flickered, weak and uncertain, like a candle struggling against the wind. Tears burned his eyes. "Jesus, what does this mean? Am I not saved?" Jesus' gaze pierced through him. "You were given life, but you never truly lived for me. You believed, but you never surrendered." He closed the book, and the sound echoed like a thunderclap. "Now, I send you back, but choose wisely, Michael, for soon the door will close." Before Michael could speak, the light exploded around him. The book of life faded. Heaven vanished. And in an instant he felt himself being pulled back to the world of the living. As Michael was pulled back toward life, another vision overtook him, one more terrifying than anything he had seen before. Keo is no longer in the presence of Jesus. Instead, he stood in the middle of a world that was falling apart. Darkness stretched across the sky, swallowing the sun and casting everything into an eerie twilight. Cities burned. People ran in terror as chaos erupted around them. The ground trembled violently, splitting open and swallowing entire buildings. Thunder roared overhead, but it wasn't a normal storm, it was judgment. Michael turned and saw masses of people, their faces filled with confusion and dread. They screamed, but no one came to save them. Some fell to their knees, crying out to God, but it was too late. The door had closed. The ones who had rejected the truth, who had laughed at warnings, who had lived for themselves instead of for God, they were left behind. Then Michael saw something even worse to mark. People lined up in droves, their faces blank, their souls empty, receiving a dark symbol on their hands and foreheads. It pulsed with a sinister energy, and once they took it, their eyes changed lifeless, enslaved. They had made their choice. A voice thundered through the sky, shaking the very foundations of the earth. They refused the truth and believed the lie. Now they belonged to him. Michael turned and saw a massive figure standing on a global stage. Charismatic, powerful. The world adored him. He spoke of unity, of peace, of a new era. But Michael knew the truth. He wasn't a savior, he was a deceiver, and the world had given itself to him willingly. The vision changed again. War, famine, nations crumbling. The earth itself seemed to be groaning under the weight of sin, and above it all, a clock. It was ancient, golden, and its hands were ticking down seconds from midnight. Michael's heart pounded. He wanted to scream, to warn them, to tell them what was coming, but no one could hear him. The final moments were slipping away. Then a final whisper echoed through the chaos. "Tell them, before it's too late." And just like that, Michael woke up. Michael's eyes shot open, his lungs gasping for air as if he had been drowning. His body ached, his heart pounded, but his mind, his soul was overwhelmed by what he had just seen. It wasn't just a dream. It wasn't just a vision. It was a warning. As he lay there, still caught between two realities, the voice of Jesus echoed in his spirit. "Warn them before the door closes." The words carried an urgency that made his entire being tremble. He could still feel the weight of the book of life, still hear the cries of those left behind, still see the terror of a world plunged into darkness. Time was running out. Michael's heart broke as he realized how many people, his friends, his family, even strangers, were walking blindly toward destruction, just like he had been. They thought they had time. They thought faith was just about attending church, saying a quick prayer, being a good person. But Michael had seen the truth. Faith wasn't about religion. It was about truly knowing Jesus, and those who didn't, they wouldn't make it. Tears welled up in his eyes as the weight of the mission settled on his soul. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about everyone. The world was on borrowed time, and Jesus had given him a second chance, not for his sake, but so he could warn the others. His body was still weak, but his spirit was stronger than it had ever been. He sat up, his hands shaking. He knew what he had to do. He had to tell everyone what he had seen, what Jesus had shown him, even if they mocked him, even if they didn't believe, because soon the door would close. Michael's body convulsed as paramedics worked frantically over him. 3 minutes. That's how long he had been gone. But to him, it had felt like an eternity. His soul had traveled beyond the veil, had seen the truth of what lay beyond death. And now, against all odds, he was back. Gasps filled the air as his eyes fluttered open. A medic shouted, "We've got a pulse." But Michael barely heard them. His mind was still overwhelmed by what he had just experienced. Jesus had saved him. Hell was real. The end was near. And the world had no idea. The days that followed were a blur. Michael tried to tell people, his family, his friends, but most brushed him off. It was just a hallucination. Your brain was shutting down. You were dreaming. Even some churchgoers dismissed him, unwilling to believe that a God of love would allow such terrifying consequences. But Michael knew. He had felt the flames. He had heard the voices. He had seen the book. And then the attacks began. Not physical ones, spiritual. At night, he would wake up gasping, a suffocating darkness pressing against him. Whispers filled his room, mocking, accusing. "Stay silent. No one will believe you. You're wasting your time." Shadows loomed in the corners, moving when they shouldn't. The enemy didn't want him to speak. Doubt clawed at his mind. Maybe he should let it go. Maybe he should just move on, live a normal life. But then Jesus' final words echoed in his heart. "Warn them before the door closes." This wasn't about him. This was about souls on the edge of eternity, completely unaware of the danger they were in. He couldn't stay silent. He wouldn't. So he made a decision. No matter the cost, no matter the ridicule, he would tell the world what he had seen, because time was running out. Michael's voice trembled as he shared his testimony for the first time. The stares, the skepticism, the whispers, it didn't matter. He had seen the truth, and nothing could silence him. He looked straight into the camera, his heart pounding. "I was dead for 3 minutes, and in those 3 minutes I saw eternity." He warned them about the judgment, about the deception sweeping the world, about the urgency of turning to Jesus before it was too late. Faith isn't just believing in God. It's truly knowing Him, surrendering to Him, because one day the door will close, and when that moment comes, there are no second chances. Michael knew many wouldn't believe him. Some would mock, others would dismiss it as just another near-death story. But he also knew that some would listen, some would wake up, some would realize that time was shorter than they thought. He took a deep breath and finished with one final plea. Don't wait until it's too late. Surrender to Jesus now. If you've ever felt Him calling you, this is your sign. The door is still open, but not for long. His voice lowered, filled with urgency. Do you think you'd be ready if today was your last day? Let me know in the comments. And please share this. Someone out there needs to hear it before it's too late. As the video ended, Michael closed his eyes. He had done his part. The rest was in God's hands. Michael's story is more than just a near-death experience. It's a warning. A warning that judgment is real, hell is real, and time is running out. Here's the good news. The door is still open. Right now, you have a choice. You can ignore this message, push it aside, and hope there's more time. Or you can take it as the wake-up call it is. What will you do? If Jesus came back today, would you be ready? Let me know in the comments. And if this message moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it before it's too late. Don't miss more life-changing stories. Subscribe now and turn on notifications. Kuda. The next video could be the message you need to hear.